The story of Nolan Wells has gripped the nation. The 18-year-old went to Horn Island with friends on July 4th and never made it home. Tonight, his parents, Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley, and their lawyer, Mr. Ben Crump, are here to share about their fight for the truth of what happened to Nolan and also to tell us who Nolan was. Before we talk about anything related to the case, I want to express my condolences to you, Christine and Elmore, and to just say that you have been so inspirational in the midst of your pain and grief, the way you have advocated for Nolan.
Nolan Wells' phone spent days in the hands of the people who were with him when he died, not investigators. According to his family, a family friend had to retrieve it. That single detail is driving the latest developments in this case. We'll separate what's confirmed, what's publicly claimed, and what's still unanswered as we examine the newest information. What has drawn public attention to this case is everything downstream of that. Nolan's parents, Christine Wells Wansley and Elmore Wansley, say they've gone more than a week without a substantive update from local authorities. The last word they got was simply that there was nothing new to report. Their attorney, civil rights lawyer Ben Crump, has gone further, describing the pace and posture of the investigation as inadequate, and drawing a direct comparison to how he believes a case would be handled if the racial dynamics were reversed. That comparison is Crump's characterization. It's an opinion he's putting forward publicly, not a documented finding, and we'll treat it that way throughout. At the same time, a competing narrative about what happened on the island that day has surfaced publicly, involving a young man named Trason Shepard, who has described himself as Nolan's best friend. Nolan's parents dispute that characterization directly. They say they've never met him. That's the contradiction we mentioned a moment ago, and it's one of several threads this update is going to walk through carefully. That much isn't in dispute. An 18-year-old with a future in front of him went to an island on July 4th and didn't come home. What's disputed, and what we're going to sort through piece by piece, is almost everything that happened next. Let's start with what's driving all of this because none of the rest of the update makes sense without it. Christine Wells Wansley says she hasn't heard from local authorities since the previous Tuesday. And when she did hear something, the update was this: there was no update. That's a direct, on-the-record statement from Nolan's mother, and we're treating it as confirmed, not because we've independently verified the investigator's side of it, but because it's a specific, attributable claim from a named person describing her own experience.
Tell me, since you've been doing these interviews, have you heard anything new? What is the latest with the local investigation that is happening alongside of independent investigation?
So I'm going to be honest, we have not heard from our local authorities since last Tuesday. And that was because I sent a text. I was like, hey, this is Christine, Nolan's mom, just wanted to get an update. We received a phone call, basically really no updates. And that was it. We've heard from no one else.
Wow. Mr. Crump, what's your reaction to that? Is there anything that indicates, is that abnormal for you as someone who's worked on many cases?
It certainly is, if you put it in context. I know I had the opportunity to talk with Byron Allen, and Byron and I really had a deep exchange because we talked about if the roles were reversed, this investigation would be handled totally different. I mean, you would have had those young men being interrogated, they would have been separated. It would have been like first 48. If you had three young black men with one young white man, and that young white man ended up dead. And so what Elmore and Christine and all of us have been saying, we want a zealous investigation for our son too. We want you to do for our son what you would do for anybody's son and get to the bottom of this.
What's separate from that, and this distinction matters, is whether the investigation is actually deficient. That's where Ben Crump's language comes in. He's called the investigation laissez-faire, and he's drawn a direct comparison to how he believes this case would be handled if the racial dynamics were reversed. That's Crump's characterization. It's a serious opinion coming from an experienced civil rights attorney, and it deserves to be heard. But it's his read on the situation, not a finding anyone's put on paper, and we're not going to blur that line. That frustration is what led the family to bring in outside counsel. And outside counsel immediately raised a second, more pointed set of questions. Elmore Wansley's picture of his son runs headfirst into the story that's been circulating about that afternoon. Elmore Wansley describes raising his son with a specific set of values, chief among them that you don't separate from your group. He says flatly that he doesn't believe Nolan would have voluntarily stayed behind on that island. And he's especially firm on one point. He doesn't believe Nolan would have left his phone behind under any circumstance if he'd chosen to stay. Why does this matter? Because it's the emotional and logical foundation for almost everything the family disputes later in this update. If you accept their read on Nolan's character, the he chose to stay narrative doesn't hold together for them. But let's name what this actually is. This is the family's read on their son's character, not a verified account of what actually happened on the island. Parents describing who their child was is powerful, and it carries real weight. It is not, on its own, evidence of what occurred that afternoon. Both things can be true. Nolan may well have been exactly who his father describes, and we still don't have an independently confirmed account of his final hours. Two people are calling themselves close to Nolan. Only one of them is family. Trason Shepard has publicly identified himself as Nolan's best friend, and he's claimed to be the person seen in a viral video that's been widely attributed to Nolan. Nolan's parents dispute this directly. They say they have never met him, and they push back on the idea that he and Nolan were close.
Have you spoken to Trason since Nolan's passing, and how are you responding to his account of what happened?
So first of all, we don't know Tristan. We've never met him. So to say, best friend, childhood friend, that's a bit of a stretch. We've never met him. He's never been to our home. Now, if you were to say that about Jalen or Javon, I would say absolutely. You could say that those are childhood friends, those are best friends because they've been to our home. We know their family. We're close to, their mother. But this young man, I maybe high school, they started hanging out or, kind of been around each other. But again, we don't know him.
Here's why this matters more than it might seem to on the surface. This isn't a minor detail. If Shepard's account of the relationship is accurate, it changes how much weight his version of events should carry. If the parents are right, it raises the question of why someone would publicly claim a closeness with Nolan that didn't exist, and what that means for anything else Shepard has said. Which cuts both ways for him and for the FAMO. We don't have independent confirmation of the nature of their relationship. We have two public accounts that contradict each other, from people with very different vantage points and very different incentives. Neither version has earned the last word yet. If this next detail holds up, it removes the one clean explanation anyone's offered for why Nolan stayed. Part of the public narrative around this case is that Nolan chose to remain on the island because he'd met a girl, Katie.
We don't know. We've never met
Katie has since been identified, and her own reported account of the interaction is far more modest than the narrative suggests.
It was a hey and bye
Essentially a brief hey and bye, not the kind of connection that would explain someone staying behind.
What I'm getting from
accurate, that's significant. It would directly undercut the idea that Nolan had a personal reason to separate from his friends that day. But here's where we need to be exact about the sourcing. Katie's identity, the fact that she exists and has been identified, appears to be reportedly confirmed. The content of what she actually said, though, is coming to us secondhand, relayed by Nolan's mother in this interview. That's not the same as an independently confirmed, on-the-record statement from Katie herself. Until that exists, this one's still waiting on a source, a claim that notably moves in the family's favor, which is exactly why it still deserves the same scrutiny as any other unverified claim. This next one carries real weight, and real uncertainty in equal measure. Ben Crump says his office has received calls from witnesses describing Nolan as being involved in arguments on the island, roughly 10 minutes apart, shortly before he went missing. If true, that detail complicates any narrative that frames what happened to Nolan as purely accidental or purely voluntary. This is the one to slow down on. This is a claim relayed by an attorney, sourced to callers whose identities and credibility we can't independently assess from here. It hasn't been corroborated publicly. We're not going to imply that this points toward foul play, because that's not what we know. What we can say is that it raises a specific answerable question that, as of the most recent reporting, remains open. Did these arguments happen, and if so, what were they about? Now back to that phone. According to the family, Nolan's phone was eventually recovered from the other boys who'd been on the boat, not by law enforcement, but through a friend of Christine's acting outside any official process. That circumstance as described by the family. Separately, Crump has alleged that texts and Snapchat messages were deleted from the phones belonging to the other boys on the boat. That's a serious allegation. Nothing more than that yet. It hasn't been independently verified. We don't know from this interview alone what forensic analysis has or hasn't been done on those devices. Crump's team has also indicated plans for an independent autopsy. That's a planned action, not a finding. It tells us something is coming, not what it will say. Put together, a phone recovered outside official channels, an unverified claim of deleted digital evidence, and pending forensic results. None of that necessarily means wrongdoing occurred. It means there's a concrete, physical evidence trail that hasn't been fully accounted for yet, and that's the part still missing. Crump has laid out a fairly specific list of what he believes still needs to happen. It's worth separating this out clearly because this is a request, not a result. He's calling for digital forensics on the phones belonging to everyone who was on the boat. He wants the witness-reported argument timelines cross-referenced against the statements the boys have already given. He wants a full, direct, on-the-record statement from Katie herself, not secondhand. And he wants a comparative review of how this investigation has been handled against standard protocol for missing persons cases in similar circumstances. These are recommendations from the family's counsel. They are not investigative findings, and they're not confirmation that anything improper occurred. They're a roadmap for what would need to happen for a lot of these open questions to actually get closed. Let's pause here and lay out exactly where things stand. No new claims in this section, just a clear separation of what's solid and what's still open. Here's what we can say plainly without hedging. 18 years old. Gone after a July 4th trip to Horn Island. On a boat with friends. His phone recovered, not by police but by a family friend who got it from the other boys on the boat. Ben Crump representing the family. And as of the most recent reporting, no substantive update from local investigators in over a week. That's the confirmed foundation. Everything else in this case sits on top of it. Now here's what we don't know, and this list matters just as much as the one before it. Was Nolan involved in arguments in the time before he disappeared? We have second-hand reports of this, but nothing independently confirmed. Was digital evidence, text, Snapchat messages, actually deleted from the other boys' phones? And if so, who deleted it and when? Right now, this is an allegation, not an established fact. What did Katie actually say in her own words about her interaction with Nolan? We have a second-hand version. We don't yet have her direct account. Is Tracy Shepard's claim about being Nolan's best friend accurate? We have two accounts that flatly contradict each other, and no way from here to say which one is right. Has this investigation moved differently than comparable cases would? That's a serious question the family and their attorney are raising. It hasn't been independently examined. And finally, what will an independent autopsy actually show? Right now, that's a plan, not a result. We don't have an answer yet. 6 real questions. None of them have a paper trail yet. So why do these specific things matter? Let's take them one at a time in plain terms. Digital evidence. If messages or snaps were deleted from the boys' phones, recovering that data matters for one simple reason. It would help fill in a timeline that right now depends almost entirely on people's memories and second-hand accounts. That's it. Recovering deleted data doesn't tell you why it was deleted. Phones get cleared for all kinds of ordinary reasons: storage space, habit, unrelated privacy concerns. The point isn't to assume the worst. The point is that a disputed timeline is easier to reconstruct with more information in it, not less. Witness statements. Anonymous tips are only useful once you can check them against something solid. That's why cross-referencing the reported arguments against the boys' own statements matters. Not because the tips are automatically true, but because that's how you find out whether they hold up. Timeline inconsistencies. This one's simple and worth saying plainly. An inconsistency is not an accusation. If two accounts of the same afternoon don't match, that doesn't mean someone is lying. It means two accounts don't match and someone needs to figure out why. That's a normal part of any investigation. It's not a verdict. The independent autopsy. Here's what an autopsy can realistically tell us. Things about cause and manner of death. Here's what it can't tell us. It can't settle whether Tracy Shepard's friendship claim is accurate, or what Katie actually said, or whether an argument took place. Those are separate questions, and no single piece of evidence is going to resolve all of them at once. It's worth being precise about that so nobody expects more from the autopsy than it can actually deliver. None of this means wrongdoing occurred. It means there are specific answerable questions still sitting open, and that's exactly what an investigation exists to close. So, where does all of this actually leave things? The investigation is ongoing. Several of the claims we've walked through today, the arguments on the island, the deleted messages, the accuracy of Trassen Shepard's account, remain unverified. That's not a criticism of anyone who's made those claims. It's just where things stand right now. And let's be plain about this. Everyone named in this case, including Trassen Shepard, is entitled to a presumption of innocence unless and until evidence says otherwise. That's not a technicality. That's how this is supposed to work for him and for anyone else who gets pulled into a story like this one.
We plan on trying to make sure we can retrieve these deleted messages. That's going to be really important. We know that others deleted their messages. If law enforcement wanted to convince us they were doing a thorough job, they would say, no, those messages, you all do activating your social media and whatever texts and snaps that happened on that July 4th weekend, those can be very relevant to why Nolan Wells ended up dead. So why aren't you all retrieving those text messages and those snaps? Because again, as Byron and Allen talked about with so much conviction, that would have been the level of scrutiny and zealousness had the roles been reversed. And so that's what we keep fighting on. But I do believe this, Natasha. Young people are talking.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of young people out there. Nobody believes that Nolan either fell off a boat or jumped in the water without people seeing it. That would make no sense. And if that is the case, then why didn't people try to help him? Or people didn't try to do anything? It's not adding up. It is not adding up.
One of the things that has really just confounded so many people is, again, this question of a cell phone being separated from a young person and other people possessing that cell phone, but not knowing where the young person is.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any more insight into who passed the phone to who? What's the explanation for how the cell phone ended up in someone else's hands? Elmore or Christine, do you know?
So it's unclear, like I said, and Elmore has said, I just cannot fathom Nolan leaving his phone. Even his best friends are like, no, if Nolan was gonna stay anywhere, if theoretically, because we know that's not Nolan's character. But theoretically speaking, if he were to, then what he would say is, hey man, give me my phone, let me grab my phone, or something he would take his phone. So to sit there and say that, oh, he just left his phone, like that's hard for me to believe. I don't see any teenager without their phone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have to keep my phone on me, at all times. So no. But as far as like the retrieval, when the boys called, I was tracking, I was like, he's on land. Like, what do you mean? And they're like, no, his phone is not with him. And so, my friend Tashima, she went to go pick the phone up because we were trying to figure out who do we call to file this report with. As I'm being told by his friends, like, oh, don't worry. Like, we're going to find him. It's going to be okay. Absolutely not. Don't ever tell a parent that. Don't ever tell a parent, like, you call me and tell me my child is missing. And then it's, oh, well, it's going to be okay. Like, we're going to find him. And this is how we found our child. So
it's a lot. As a parent, I, again, grieve with you and can only imagine how painful this has been.
Of the Mississippi law enforcement officials giving them a fair investigation where their black son ended up dead after going out on a boat with 3 young white men.
We just want to know. We just want to know what happened and why our baby didn't come home.
We're going to keep following this case. If more verified information becomes available, We'll continue covering this case with accuracy, fairness, and respect for everyone involved. If you want to stay with us as this develops, consider subscribing. We'll bring you those facts as we actually get them, and not a moment before.